Welcome to the Growth Machine Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Natividad. Today, we talk with Tim Stoddart, who is a business owner, marketer, writer, and podcast host. He is a partner at Copyblogger, runs his own digital marketing agency called Stoddart Internet Marketing, is the founder of Sober Nation, and hosts the Tim Stodds podcast. He really does it all, and I am so excited to get to talk with him at length. Hey, Tim, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Really excited to be here. I'm a big fan of you guys, and I'm happy to have this conversation.
Awesome. Well, you're a busy person, and we have a lot of ground to cover. So let's start with Copyblogger. I know this was the entry point into the rest of your businesses. So could you tell us about your work with Copyblogger? And actually, maybe just starting out, in case anyone isn't familiar, can you first tell us about Copyblogger?
Be happy to. Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. Copyblogger is a website. It's a website that specializes around teaching people how to write great content so that they can build their own online businesses. It's called content marketing these days. We've all heard the term, but content marketing can expand upon video or audio, just any real form of content. And although at Copyblogger we do talk about those things, we really like to specialize on the writer. I believe that good writing is just the best skill you can have to grow an online business. It's just a great skill to have in general. And so that's what we specialize in. The business itself is very important to me. You mentioned that it was kind of the catalyst. I forget exactly what words you used, but it was the catalyst to me in my online career. Long story short, 10 years ago, I moved to Florida and I was kind of looking for some direction. I'm from Philadelphia. I was born and raised there. And so I had never even really been out of Philly. And then all of a sudden one day I'm launched in this new place and there's lizards on the ground and I had no direction and no education and I was going nowhere fast. And I'd always been a writer. It was just something that I would do. Like my mom was that typical poet, brought notebooks with her everywhere and would just write poems everywhere she went. And so that was kind of instilled in my childhood and my personality. And so when I moved to Florida about 6 months in, I'm really looking around. I got some odd jobs and trying to find a direction and a career in my life. And I discovered this website, copyblogger.com. And through that, it sounds not that long ago, but in internet years, 10 years ago was a long time. This whole concept of content marketing wasn't even really a thing. Back then, you would create content to basically sell ads against. The whole idea that you would use content to build an audience and then use the content itself as a way to sort of establish authority in an industry or just to establish a group of people that respected you or that appreciated your insight on a particular knowledge base. And then through that audience, you would build a business. And it sounds so crazy to think that even 10 years ago, that was a brand new concept, but it was really an emerging way to build businesses online as opposed to the content itself kind of being the product, right? That you would leverage advertising dollars against. And so I found this website, Copyblogger, and I was just instantly hooked. I just knew, I was I can do this. I can write, I can share my story. I can find other people to share their story. I can write things that I felt inspired people. And I wasn't as polished of a writer back then, but even still, I always had a good knack of just telling a good story and getting people engaged in that. And so Copyblogger was my education, basically. It was the thing that I studied that taught me how to do this thing called content marketing. And a lot has happened in between now and then. I built a couple online businesses. I got a really great team. We expanded all over the country and more or less all over the world, including, Australia and London and even in South America. But more or less, this entire career that I've built, this new way for me to be an entrepreneur, it all came from just reading Copyblogger every day and just learning how to write content for the internet, learning how to format my content in a particular way so that as people absorb it, for the people that are scanning your content, basically, they can still get out of it, learning how to build email lists, learning how to build automation and funnels. And And now 10 years later, I was just in a really, really great position where I was able to become a partner in that website. And it has gone through a real transformation. You know, there wouldn't have been an opportunity for me to be a partner if the site itself wasn't going through some changes. But more or less, the guy, Brian Clark, that actually founded Copyblogger has always been like an idol to me. And I reached out to him about a year ago, and we built a relationship. And now he's my business partner, and I have a pretty significant equity stake in Copyblogger, and it's still a dream come true. Like I can't believe that that's a real thing that happened like in my life. But it's going well. We just launched our product. We just launched our membership site, Copyblogger Pro. We hit our goal exactly. We wanted to get 700 members, and we hit exactly 700 members. And so it was a really successful launch. We still got a long ways to go, and I'm excited about the work that we're doing. But man, it's been like a real journey and a real privilege to get there.
That's really cool. Can you tell us what's included in the Member Pro account?
Yeah, sure. Well, we have a community. Obviously, anytime you make a membership site, you want to have community. You want to give people ways to bounce ideas off of each other. And that's really important. And then every month we plan different lessons, and we plan, we bring in guests that are experts in different kind of methodologies on content marketing. So this first week we talked about building a content marketing strategy. And Brian Clark, the founder, he's like always been a real master at that. Everything he does, he just can't miss because he knows how to like do the research in the beginning and build a proper strategy. And so we have monthly masterclasses. We have a really cool section, which I'm most excited about, which is like, it's a digital way to do quick shot one-on-one coaching. So there's basically a question form where people can show examples and send in screenshots of like a question they have with their online business or anything. It can be a design question, an SEO question, maybe like a piece of copy that they want some insight on, and they submit it. And then as we go through these questions, we just make really quick live videos, and then we record them obviously, and we publish them. So there's an archive in Copyblogger Pro of all the one-on-one coaching sessions that we have. And I think that's really cool. It's still just getting started, but that's already been a big hit, and I'm pumped about it. And then of course, all of the courses that we have in there, we have a la carte courses. We have a whole 20-year library of ebooks and of old archived content that we've put together. And then of course, there's just the monthly live masterminds. There's the monthly live sessions with guest experts. And then there's the monthly Q&A session. So it's super high value. Super worth it, and just super awesome.
That's cool. And then also, you talked about people posting in the community about getting feedback on their work. I think that's such a great way to do that. I mean, that's people tapping into experts and tapping into other people who care about that kind of thing. So that's cool.
Yeah, that's my favorite part. I mean, obviously that's where most people are going to spend their time. Like you can't do an hour presentation every single day. It would be overwhelming. Like there wouldn't be enough space to actually absorb the content and implement it. But the community is where I spend most of my time. I'm the one back there managing it mostly. And the people are into it, man. Like it's just always fun to see passionate people come together and learning. And it just makes you feel good. It gives you like a real purpose and just makes you feel good about your contribution to the world.
Yeah. I want to get back to what you said about writing. You self-identify as a writer, and I do as well. But there are a lot of people who don't, and who feel like, oh, I'm not a writer. I can't do that. That's not what I do. What is your stance on that? And how can reframe that and become a writer?
I see my writing a lot like I see my fitness. It's just one of those really pure things in the world that no matter how much you try, there's no way to get around the fact that you just have to write. It's like when you see somebody walking down the street that's in shape, like the only way they got that way was by building a really good fitness regimen and actually just like doing the reps. Writing is very the same. It's like a painful, like semi-torturous process that brings you face to face with yourself, because you can never like lie your way through a piece. You can never fake your way through a piece. Like, if you said what it was that you wanted to say in the way that you wanted to say it. Like you just know it in your heart. Uh, so answering the question a little bit more directly, what I try to do is I take a lot of the Seth Godin approach where he talks about writer's block and how there's really no such thing because there's no such thing as plumber's block. There's no such thing as talker's block. You know, like if you're a plumber, you don't show up for work and just be like, oh, I can't do plumbing today. I have plumber's block. And it's the same thing with writing. Like you show up and you do your best work. And some days your work is going to be not as good as the other days, but that's okay. I don't know if we talked about this last time we spoke, but the book, The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, I just think anybody that writes needs to read this because half the battle of being a writer is really just that moment where like you sit down and you're just like, what do I say? And getting through in that book, he calls it the resistance, you know, getting through the resistance, pushing yourself through all of those little demons inside of your heart that are trying to keep you safe and are trying to keep you from like being exposed and are trying to keep you in the tribe, you know, like part of the zebra herd, like battling those little demons and just getting your thoughts out there and hitting publish and shipping your work. That's always been my way around it. You know, it's never been the most polished approach. I'm sure there's people out there that have found a better way, but for me, it's really been as simple as facing yourself every day and just getting something out there and then just hitting publish.
That's good advice. Now I want to talk about your side businesses. You have a couple of them. You have Sober Nation and you have Stoddart Internet Marketing. Maybe let's start at Sober Nation first. I want to, you know, tell us all about it and tell us how you started it and why you started it.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's funny to think of Sober Nation as a side business. It's really been the bulk of my life's work. The reason why I think I can call it a side business now is simply because over years, like you develop a system and you develop a team. And so it's basically running itself at this point. But believe me, that really wasn't always the case. Yeah, okay, look, you guys heard me talk about me moving to Florida. The fact of the matter is that I just had a real tough time when I was younger. I had a tough time with drugs and alcohol and getting in trouble and police and a lot of the things that I'm sure a lot of people listen to this struggle with themselves. You know, I'm not like past talking about it anymore. I don't feel ashamed about it anymore. If anything, I feel like it's been a real asset in my life. And when I moved to Florida, I had a cousin who was also in recovery, and he basically just let me stay on his couch because where else was I going to go? And he helped me out a lot. And so when I said through those 6 months that I was looking for some direction and I found Copyblogger, the first thing I did is I just started writing. And another story that I like to tell in podcasts is I had a mentor at the time. He's still kind of a mentor, a lot more back then. And he bought me a subscription to Success Magazine. And Success Magazine, believe it or not, used to have CDs. And this is only 10 years ago. Again, it's like another one of those examples that it's so hysterical. But actually used to have CDs in them, which with interviews. And right at that same time that I found Copyblogger, there was a CD in this particular issue of Success that had an interview with Seth Godin. And I was listening to him, and this was when Purple Cow came out. And so he was really into the idea of like spreading idea viruses, right? It's not necessarily the best marketing, it's the best idea that wins, and ideas that spread win. And the last thing that he said was, what's one piece of advice that you would give to somebody? And he said, start a blog, write it every day, and don't tell anybody about it. And I just, on a leap of faith, did that. This was when Blogspot was still around. And so I opened a Blogspot account and I just started writing about basically getting sober every day. And before long, probably like 5 or 6 months in, you know, my life was getting a little bit better and I was like having some clarity. And I started seeing like, how are people getting to this website? I'm not promoting it. Remember, Seth Godin told me, don't tell anybody. And so like, how are people even finding it? And that's when I discovered SEO. And so a couple bells in my head started ringing. And I saw there was like an opportunity for directories. The I'm trying to say this in as few as words as possible, but a friend of mine had he had a job where he was selling advertisement to country clubs, and so they would look on this website for different country clubs to know the businesses to call to sell advertisement for those books that were in the country clubs. And I was writing a lot, and I was starting to get a lot of other people in recovery, and he had this website that he was going to, which was a country club directory, and he basically said like, hey man, I have this idea for a directory of treatment centers for people that need to get sober and don't know where to go. And I was like, oh, it's so funny you say that, man. Like I have this idea for this really cool online magazine. Like I didn't even know it was called a blog at that point. And we basically joined forces and started what today is more or less like the world's biggest online recovery resource. You know, I'm happy to say that that original idea, it's morphed into something much different, and it's just been me for the last 10 years. Like I started the business, I have the website. A lot of those original thoughts, as is the same in like any kind of business, like you have this idea and what it turns into isn't actually what you thought it was going to be. You know what I mean? It's just like constantly chipping away and iterating and like finding what it is that people actually want. So with all of that being said, Sober Nation has been like an amazing journey of success and failure and camaraderie and teamwork and creativity, all just to build this really, really cool giant resource center for people that are either struggling or people that like maybe have gotten sober and are just looking to connect with other people. And even more than that, it's also turned into like a really, really successful business for me. And so every time I talk about it, I just feel really proud because in my view, like the perfect business is something that you love doing, that you make money doing, that helps other people, you know, and Sober Nation does all three of those things. Like I love doing it. My team loves doing it. It provides for me financially in my life, and it helps a ton of people. And it's just been, it's been crazy, really. Like it's been crazy, but I'm really happy about it.
Thank you for sharing that. I just really admire how you took something that, you know, you started out in this place of pain and you turned it into something that became a source of strength for yourself and for other people. And then also just turning it into a really strong support system for others. I think it's awesome.
Thank you. It's always funny when people congratulate you on that because it's not like I ever woke up one day and it was just like, I have this really cool idea. I'm just going to like stop doing drugs and stop drinking and everybody's going to be so proud of me. You know, like it was exactly the opposite. However, it really has like, it's funny because in a lot of the conversations when it comes up, like a lot of the podcasts that I have are like digital marketing podcasts and entrepreneurship podcasts, but like my journey was just that I found this really cool community around sobriety. And like, I can't talk about my journey of entrepreneurship really without talking about that part of my life. And so like it sounds so crazy that I'm really grateful for it because the lessons that I've learned through all those experiences and through getting sober have just been a marvelous like undertone of guidance throughout business, through relationships, through I don't know, just overcoming adversity, right? Like the lessons that you learn while going through that process of getting sober help you in all areas of your life. And so yeah, and it sucked, and I really wish I didn't go through a lot of stuff that I did, but I wouldn't change it at all.
Yeah. So as you told the story of Sober Nation, it also had me thinking about, well, it had me thinking about this idea of building in public as, you know, that's becoming more of a thing now on social. And what's fascinating to me is you built Sober Nation in private for quite a while, right? You were blogging every day just for yourself and for Seth Godin. But you're blogging every day for yourself and kept that to yourself for a long time. And then once you had that, or once you got past that step of producing every day, then you started thinking about distribution or thinking just about how you could connect with other people. So I'm curious now, what are your thoughts on this idea of building in public?
Well, I think it's still great advice. Um, I'm always a little bit weary of mantras like that because a lot of times I'm just a little cynical when it comes to social media. Like, you got to understand, I went through the whole bait and switch on Facebook. When we had 40,000 fans on Facebook, I could publish an article and watch the thing go completely viral right in front of me. I would sit in my live Google Analytics and just hit publish and watch it spread to tens of thousands of people right away. And now we have close to 500,000 fans, and you hardly get anything. And it's so algorithmic, right? And so just the whole underlying context of social media, whether it's the algorithms or whether it's the people on it, um, I'm just always nervous to use that as a channel because, in my view, when people are saying things like build in public, really what they're doing is they're creating like a marketing hack for themselves. And they're creating like a brand or something that they can, like an idea that they can bring to the world that garners them attention. And I'm by no means saying that that's wrong. That's good marketing. And I think that that's excellent. What I'm saying is that building in public is an exercise in marketing just as much as it's an exercise in creativity. You know, if you don't want to build in public, it doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. It just means that you're not following like this social media influencer trend. So my answer is like, yeah, building in public is great. And from my own blog and from my podcast, like I do that. I a lot of times publish the results, and sometimes I'll publish my stats and I'll say like, hey, I'll do case studies on myself or whatever. And so I think it's really, really cool. But just because you're not out there kind of self-promoting or showing the world what you're doing doesn't mean that you're not going to be successful. Like, there's just as many examples of people that don't want that attention and that are building businesses that like you ain't never heard of, that are making a ton of money and providing value for them and for other people and for themselves. So it's cool, and definitely build in public, especially if you think it's fun. Like, if you enjoy it, then do it. But if you choose not to do that, it doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong.
Yeah. I want to get back to how you grew Sober Nation. Once you decided you wanted to kind of distribute it or just be more out there with what you were doing, did you actively want to start a community? Was that the next step that you knew you wanted to take with it?
Yeah, absolutely. That was very intentional. And that was very, so what happened, I thought I had this brilliant idea that nobody's ever heard of, but it turns out that healthcare in general has and probably always will be one of the most competitive spaces online. Like, gathering healthcare attention is just hard. You got some of the biggest businesses in the world with some of the smartest people in the world fighting for these clicks. And so, like about 6 months into it, I realized that it wasn't that unique of an idea, that it was really hard. And not only that, I was going against people that were so much better than me. But the advantage that I saw was this was 10 years ago. So it was still a relatively new concept. And I remember just coming up with this idea, thinking again that it was some brilliant idea, not realizing that it was just another way to do the same thing. But I just remember thinking, like, I don't have to be in it. I can be on top of it. That was actually the words that came into my head. And so I just had this idea that if I have this treatment center as part of my community, or this behavioral health center as part of my community, and this nonprofit as part of my community, and this mental health or eating disorder type center, if we're all just talking amongst each other, but I'm the one kind of on top of it all, mitigating the conversation, I remember thinking that, like, I don't have to actually compete with anybody. I can just be my own thing. And so I remember exactly where it was, where that came to me. Like, I don't have to be in it. I can just be on top of it. I used to live in this apartment complex, so I would go for walks every night because my brain was always racing in circles as it still does today. And so when that popped in my head, I just thought, there's no reason to go head to head with anybody. I can just build a community and literally just sit on top of it. And so that's what I did.
That's awesome. Now I want to ask you about Stoddart Internet Marketing. So when did you start that?
That was so if Sober Nation was started in 2011, Stodzy was started in about halfway through 2012. And and I was just getting really, I've always been pretty entrepreneurial. I'm not like one of those guys that like I never had a job. You know, I had a construction job for years when I was a kid, and I loved it, and I love the value of hard work. With that being said, my father was a he's one of the guys that threw suitcases into airplanes. They call them luggage handlers, and my mom was an ER nurse. And after 9/11, like all the airports got shut down. And at that same time, the ER that my mom was working at got shut down. They were tearing it down to build, I think, public housing actually in North Philly. And so, like, overnight, both of my parents basically lost their jobs and there was no reason for it to come back. So I just remember making the decision right then and there that, like, I always have to make sure I invest in myself and make my own money. And so, as Sober Nation was growing, I was getting some of these other people in the industry like asking me, like, "Hey, man, I run this treatment center, but I have no idea about this thing with the internet and like how you're gathering all this attention. And can you help me build a brand around my own business?" And at the time, it wasn't just treatment centers, by the way. Like I was just starting to build a reputation, but I was kind of just creating an agency because I always knew that starting my own business was the way that I like to operate. But I read an article on Moz by this guy named Dave Ramsey. No, Dave Ramsey's the podcast guy. Dave, I forgot. He runs Nifty Marketing, niftymarketing.com. He's really into local search. And he wrote this epic blog post on Moz. It was like 30,000 words or something about all the things you know about to local search. And he talked about the decision he made to specialize in local. And he was talking to a mentor of his about starting an agency, and his mentor said to him, like, there's 30,000 agencies in the country or something. Like, why does anybody care about you? And so that was what he needed to hear to decide to go local. And so, I was getting into this digital marketing world. I was learning about writing good content and driving traffic to websites. And like our Facebook page was taking off. I think we had about 6,000 or 7,000 followers then, which drive like real results. It wasn't like it is today. The algorithm was way different. And when I read that article, I just remember thinking like, oh my God, I need to specialize in something. Like I need to be really good at one thing. And, obviously me and my story and my experience, it was just clear as day right then that the place for me to specialize was healthcare. And that's how Stodzy was born. It kind of started as a way of me just taking side projects of freelance writing or maybe optimizing meta tags for a local business and real one-on-one stuff. I was just kind of building my name and building my reputation. But once I read that article, it just became so clear to me that I need to specialize in healthcare and we need to be like the nationwide leader in SEO for healthcare. And ever since then, it's just really taken off.
That's really interesting. I like that you had you found the expertise in healthcare kind of through Sober Nation, as well as, obviously the SEO and digital marketing aspects. What are today? I mean, you've been doing healthcare marketing for a while then. So today, what do you think are some of the more interesting opportunities in healthcare marketing?
Man, I really think about doing a newsletter for healthcare marketing because it's obviously a very lucrative business, but strangely enough, for something that is like such a big part of our economy and something that affects everybody, the healthcare industry is still in a lot of ways very archaic. They haven't adopted. I mean, this blows my mind. Think about this for a second. Every time you go to the doctor, how many times you fill out that same exact form? You're never in on time. You're sitting in the waiting room for like 50 minutes. They come in, they talk to you. You're basically already done calling your boss saying like, hey, I scheduled my appointment at 12:30 specifically so I could do this on my lunch break, but it's 1:15 and I haven't even gotten seen yet. Like, I'm really sorry that I'm going to be late, And so the whole system is so archaic. And even from an operations standpoint, it's archaic internally, but from a marketing standpoint, it's also very archaic. The whole healthcare industry, whether you're talking about dentists or addiction treatment, or, I mean, you name it, diabetes clinics, whatever, it's still really, really run off of like word of mouth and referrals. Doctors get in with other companies and they refer each other. And there's a lot of like, I wouldn't say backdoor deals, because and a lot of times that's illegal, but there's relationships between different healthcare clinics, and that's how the whole entire thing operates. But think about it. When you have something with your health that you need to look into, and let's just say that you need like a dermatologist and you've never been to a dermatologist before, what's the first thing that you're going to do? You're going to pull out your phone and you're going to look for a dermatologist. And so like, it's not even that difficult marketing. It's all just local search. But the fact that there's more or less, I don't know, 100 dermatology clinics in every major city, and like maybe 5 to 10 of them really do any local marketing. It's still just so crazy to me that there's such huge opportunities there. So when you talk about opportunities, like I spend a lot of time thinking about it. There's huge software opportunities in marketing. The billing is still very archaic. A lot of the dashboards that people use are archaic. There's huge opportunities for APIs. Like, I'm surprised Zapier hasn't built a whole entire wing of their company that does nothing but connects a lot of the software that healthcare clinics use, that combines, like the patient management and the doctor's notes and the billing systems and makes them all HIPAA compliant. I'm really surprised that hasn't been done. But, if you want to like start an agency, if you're 22 years old and you're looking to be an entrepreneur and you're thinking to yourself like, man, what's a good place for me to start? Like, for real, start working with healthcare clinics and start doing local search marketing for them, because you'll have a huge impact on their business and like you'll build a great business for yourself.
That's really good advice. And I know you wrote about local search recently, specifically for healthcare. And I thought those were really interesting takeaways. And we'll link to those we'll link to the article in the show notes too.
Awesome. Thank you.
Now I wanted to ask, so we've talked about, Sober Nation, Copyblogger, Stodzy Internet Marketing. I think, at some point you probably decided you weren't busy enough and decided to start a podcast as well. Can you tell us more about why you decided to start it?
Yeah, I would be happy to. When people, you're not the first person to say that. And the truth is, I'm not that busy. There's a lot going on, but I've always been really, I read a lot of books. I'm very self-educated, and I read this book called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. And that book was just all about building systems and processes. And it's boring. And so young kids don't like to talk about stuff like that, because they like to talk about sales and monthly recurring revenue and like their new dashboard interface that they created, right? But like the success in business for me has been the real boring stuff that nobody likes to do. It's been the week of me just sitting and writing out a workflow of how I want like onboarding to happen. It's been documenting like 4-page Word docs and having it ready, so when I hire a new employee, it's like, this is how we operate. You don't have to do it anymore. So I know you asked me about my podcast, but I always like to preface that, because when people look at it from the outside, it's like, okay, you got this agency, you got this whole network of recovery websites, and you got Copyblogger. But the truth is, the first thing I do is I always take a step back and I look at how I can like automate the systems and automate the processes so that it doesn't need me in there every day. And so when I do that, I have the free time to do creative work, because that's the kind of stuff that makes me happy. Like I don't like spending time on the boring stuff, but I just do it because it gives me an opportunity to, I mean, you and I met through my podcast, right? And that's so cool. Like, you and I probably never would have met each other well, who knows? I'm sure we'd have been friends, but with all the people in the world, like we most likely wouldn't have just crossed paths. But because I have a podcast, I get the opportunity to just sit and have like 45 minute to hour long conversations with people and learn about their lives and learn about the things that they do and figure out ways that like their experience and their insight can help me in my own life. And you know, I've always been nervous with speaking. I know I said this on my podcast with Sean Perry, and he put it on Twitter, and so it was kind of like a cool moment for me because it just put it out there, and I instantly like didn't really have any anxiety or nervousness about it. But when I was growing up, I was in speech class for years, for like 10 years. I had a speech teacher, Mrs. Boop was her name, and I saw Mrs. Boop every day for years and years. I couldn't say, if you really listen, you can hear it. I couldn't say R's. Like when I'd say mirror, I'd say like mura, you know, I just couldn't do it. And so you wouldn't think so because I don't shut up anymore. But for most of my life, like I was very, very, very apprehensive to speak. And I think that's why I gravitated so much towards writing. And, you know, my podcast, I've been writing for years between Sober Nation and Stodzy and my blog. You know, I mean, you can probably relate. I've probably published like 2,000 articles. And it's not that I don't love writing. It's just sometimes I sit down and I'm like, I don't know what else I want to say. And so I just thought, how else can I contribute to the world? How can I be creative? How can I grow my own brand? And that's why I started my podcast. And it's nothing fancy. It's just pretty interview style, same as a lot of people do. But I think it's been growing as fast as it has because I'm pretty honest and like vulnerable on my show. And I think it gives other people like permission to be honest and vulnerable. And people do marketing podcasts, especially because they're looking for like the hack, right? But I'm looking for the story. Like I want to know what it is that makes somebody the way that they are and not how they do the things that they do. And so I think having that different relationship of like just being curious about people is what has made my podcast like do pretty well.
Yeah. Can you tell us about how you prepare for your podcast then?
Yeah, well, it's very case by case. Sometimes I get real nervous, and the more nervous I get, the more I prepare. So I can't publish it yet, but I actually had Seth Godin on my show. He's got his book coming out in November. And so I was real nervous. Just pacing around my house for like the whole morning. I told my wife about it when I got the email, and I had like a whole week to think about it. It probably would have been easier if he just said like, yeah, what are you doing right now? And I could have just jumped on it, you know? And so the more nervous I am, the more I prepare. I wish I had a real process for it. I just know that when I try to be cocky and I try to go into shows thinking like, yeah, whatever, I'll just have a conversation and talk whatever I want to talk about, it never goes as well. I do think building at least like some kind of an outline, even if you don't stick to it at all, you know, having that kind of outline, in your mind, and something to just always fall back on if you get stuck or if the conversation takes a weird direction, is the way to go. So I prepare by first learning about my guest. It's important to know what they've at least done. You know, like I think people make a lot of mistakes by saying like, oh, this person's got 20,000 Twitter followers. Like, how do I get them on my podcast? That's ridiculous. Like you want to know the work that they've done and you want to know what makes them tick. So I'll always spend at least a half hour just researching my guests. And then I'll probably spend another half hour just like putting some guidelines in front of me. And then, you know, after that, Amanda, like I don't really follow that much of a process. Like sometimes I'll stick to the outline. Sometimes the guest will say something that just makes me go like, oh, I want to learn more about that. And then I just give myself permission to do that. But the preparation is in knowing the work of your guests. Like it's not just about who they are, it's knowing like what they've actually done. Because when you bring their work when you shine light on their work, like they will feel way more appreciated and way more willing to talk about the things that excite them. And I think that's what makes a good episode.
That's really good advice. And I think it's so I also just think it's so important to be that thoughtful about it, because when you have someone on your show, you're also asking them for an hour of their time or however long. So it's good, or it's really important to make sure you're putting the homework into it and making sure you're asking the right questions or asking the things that you're really curious about and what you know they really want to talk about too.
Yeah, it's like a sign of respect, right?
Mm.
You know, it's like a sign of appreciation. The very least I can do for somebody is to be prepared to learn about them. They've held up their end of the bargain. So like I feel personally responsible to hold up my end.
Mhm. And I think this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think this also relates to just networking or reaching out to people in general, right? Like if you're doing a cold email to someone, whether it's someone you want to work for or someone who you want to buy your product, being really thoughtful about the outreach, about how you compose that email or that DM or whatever is really important, because you're like, yeah, you want to sell them on yourself or your product, but you also need to get them to care about you or to care about why you're reaching out to them.
Yeah, so man, I totally agree. I mean, you do marketing for an agency. How many emails a day do you get? Like, hey, madam, sir, can I post a guest post on your site? At this point, like, you don't have to read them anymore. You just know from like the first three lines if it's a real person, first of all, and even if it is a real person, are they just trying to get something out of you, or do they actually care about you? And I always find it fascinating after the 100 emails or so that I see every day about looking for backlinks or something. Every once in a while, I open one and I'm always like, why the hell did I open that email? And the reason is always because either in the subject line or even in those first, like that first line that you see in the body of the email, it just feels like they at least know a little something about me. So it's good advice all around just to know who you're talking to.
Yeah. I'm laughing at that example because it happened like an hour before this call.
You opened an email?
Yeah, I was like, what's this? Oh no. I want to talk about time management. You know, you talked about automating certain tasks. Are there any examples of tasks that you've automated or figured out how to take off your plate in a meaningful way? I'd love to hear your thoughts and your advice on this.
Yeah, I have some specific ones, and I'll try to just be short with them because this is such a big topic. Uh, I'm going to assume anybody listening to this is running an agency, right? Building a process for onboarding new clients is so good. It's such a time saver, not only for the actual act of onboarding the client, but 2 months down the road when the client is asking like your account manager some kind of question and she has to say like, oh, you know what, or he or she, excuse me, my account manager is a woman. So, and he or she has to be like, oh, you know what, I don't know. Can they either look at some kind of onboarding document and find the answer right away? Or do they have to like waste the next 45 minutes going around a rat circle, uh, going around in a circle, trying to figure out who had the last conversation with this client? Did anybody promise them like a particular thing? Was there like a side conversation over here? So like in my particular business of Stodzy, onboarding new clients and like documenting that kind of stuff has been critically important. Uh, my own time management is a little less sophisticated, but has been probably the most important habit I've ever built in my life. Um, this is probably good news right now, especially considering the whole Rome cult going on and all the note taking apps and stuff like that. And I think they're great. But for me, uh, writing down in my notebook how I feel about myself at the end of the day, basically doing like a personal inventory, like what could I have done better? Also saying things that I think I did well that day, like giving myself a little bit of praise and also maybe being a little bit critical. And then after I do my nightly inventory, I write down the things I need to do the next day. Because for some reason at night, that's when my brain is thinking about it. And then as soon as I write them down, I open my notebook to that particular page. I put it right next to my Surface on my kitchen counter. And that way, when I wake up in the morning, I don't have to go through that cycle of like, oh, what do I got going on today? Like, it's already done. And so I just look at those things and then I just do them. I'm a real big believer in like decision fatigue. Uh, as you can already probably tell from this podcast, I always have a lot of energy and like kind of high strung. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make, especially when starting businesses, is just having all these different options. And like, what do I do here? What do I do there? Like, should I go this direction? This person seems to be having some success. Should I like try to steal some of their ideas? Where for me, like the fewer decisions I make in a day, the better I feel, the more clarity my employees have. And most importantly, like the better I sleep, like the more peace I have in my head, the more freedom from my mind I have. So all of those systems that I talk about, they all serve one function. And the whole purpose of them is to make it so I don't have to make decisions. And as long as I keep that in mind, it's just works really well for me.
So you have a physical notebook that you write notes in?
Oh yeah, it's usually right next to me. I'm really surprised it's not on my desk, but it's downstairs, still on my kitchen counter. Yeah, I got stacks of them ever since I was a little kid. In the other room behind me, I got every notebook I've ever had my whole life, just stacks and stacks of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think they say that if you write something down versus type it, you retain the information better.
I think that's definitely true. I started messing around with Rome. I think it's really exciting, this whole idea of like knowledge management. And I did go about 2 weeks trying to do, I call it my power list in Rome, but I don't know, it just wasn't as effective. Like when it comes to the things that I need to do on that particular day, I always use my notebook. But when it comes to something that like I want to reinforce into my mind, either a book I read or something like that, I think those note-taking apps are great, but I don't encourage people to use them as like daily task maintenance tools for me personally. But you all do whatever you want to do.
What are you reading right now?
I always have 2 books. I have a morning book and I have a nighttime book. Like when my brain is spinning too much, I can't read really intense stuff. So I'm really into graphic novels. Right now, my nighttime book is season 4 of The Boys. The Boys is probably it's actually an Amazon show now. I'm sure a lot of people know it because it's on Amazon and you'll are probably seeing the ads everywhere. But the graphic novel series itself, other than Watchmen and maybe other than Nightfall, well, and there's another one called Saga. It's one of the top 5 best like graphic novel series there. I think Saga is probably the best one.
Saga's my favorite.
You read Saga?
I love it.
Oh,
I love it so much.
I love it when people know Saga. I'm dying for it to come out. They took like a year-long break because they were getting so burned out from writing it. I'm checking Google like every week, like when is the next Saga coming out? It's so good.
I think they said it was an indefinite break, didn't they?
Indefinite meaning they never actually like told when they're going to finish the story, but they are going to finish it. They said that they're halfway through. Yeah, they said that they're halfway through.
Okay.
I know. And then my morning book recently, well, I actually just finished it this morning. I read The Hard Thing About Hard Things. I forget his first name, Ben, maybe Horowitz, one of the guy that founded Horowitz and
Andreessen Horowitz.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Andreessen, that's it. It was good. It was very dry. It was really like technical in terms of the things that nobody talks about with being a CEO. Like, what do you do in this exact situation? He kind of broke it down. I really enjoyed it. And so I actually, this weekend, my wife and I have our Barnes & Noble's trip. We go every weekend to kind of stock up on books because we go through books so fast. So, but The Boys is where I'm at right now. And I'll need a new morning book. So I'll grab one this weekend.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. I think it would be nice to end on some advice for people. So, what is your advice right now to a small business owner or aspiring small business owner?
Yes. You made sure that I said that I don't say just get started. And I was so
Yeah, that
happy
cannot
when
be
you
it.
said that. Yeah. Like, I was so happy when you said that because we all know that, right? Like, just get started. What I would say, if you're serious about opening a small business, whether it be a brick and mortar business or an online business or an agency or whatever, is kind of reiterating on what I already said. It's be specific. There's a real temptation in the world we live in now to have like more followers, more of an audience, more traffic, right? And that works because there are some people out there that can get like millions and millions of followers. And we look at that and we think that that's probably the recipe to success. And in some cases it is. But I would definitely argue that those are anomalies. And I would argue that the more followers you have, it probably means the more generic you are. And the more generic you are, the only thing you can do to differentiate yourself is to be cheaper. And it's only a matter of time until you're racing to the bottom, right? Because like only one person can be the cheapest. And in a lot of times that person wins, like Amazon wins. But in most cases, you're going to be second, third, fourth, fifth place to be the cheapest, in which case you're like completely worthless. Because even the one thing that you had to be the cheapest, you don't have, right? And that all comes from being generic. That all comes from being like the opposite of long tail. But when you're specific, the opposite happens where you can build a reputation for something that you can do and only the way that you can do it. And when that happens, that's when you come across like the opposite paradigm. And that's when people start coming to you and you get to decide how much you're going to charge. You get to decide if you want to work with this particular person or not, or if you got to put up with this annoying person that comes into your coffee shop, even though he just sits there and sits on the internet all day, right? Like if you have something that is unique to only you and you have something that is specific, then you get to make the rules. But if you're just going after more, all you're going to do is make yourself more and more generic and more replaceable. So any small business in 2020 and beyond, you're going to have to carve out a lane. You're going to have to carve your own slice of the pie. And the trick is it doesn't have to be a big pie. You'll make more money with a small pie that is yours as opposed to like a huge pie that you're just like fighting for scraps on. So that's my advice. And I think it's the right advice. And I think it's good advice.
I think that's excellent advice. Thank you so much, Tim. And thank you for being here.
Thank you. Once again, I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing. And it was a privilege to be on the show. Thank you.
That's our show. Thanks for listening. Questions, comments, find us on Twitter at growthmachine__. And you can follow Tim on Twitter at Tim Stodds. See you next week.